As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I thought it'd be helpful for us to take some time and look at examples of ventures, companies, organizations that have done something similar to what you're trying to do. So one that we identified is this one called Water Health. I mentioned it to you last time. Did any of you have a chance to look over it at all? Probably not, which is okay, because as you remember, I encourage you to go out and talk to people first, and if you finally had a few extra minutes at the end, to go ahead and read this case study. So what I think we'll do here at the very beginning is take just a couple minutes to just read that front page of that case study. Does everyone have a copy of it? You should, hopefully. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to try to fill it out on that, just real briefly, fill it out on that business model canvas. You can do that as you're reading if you want. But I think it'll take you just a couple minutes to read through the front page. And by the front page, it's the one with the gray box at the top is the front, actually. All right? So go ahead and do that. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves and all that. Share as you go. And then we'll kind of regroup here in 5 minutes or so, and we'll talk through how this business looks and what the different aspects are and what they did to become a sustainable business. It's kind of complex in some ways. Like there's a lot going on here in order for them to become sustainable and to do these things that they want to do and to have this impact that they want to have. And so, there's a lot of things going on. One thing that I found really interesting, also for me personally, as I read through this, maybe everyone already knows this, but who would have thought that you can sell water to people who don't have much money, right? And yet that's exactly what they're doing. And it turns out, by the way, that they're not the only people who sell water. As you read through this, you find out that these people tend to buy water in general. And if you've been to some of these other countries, you'll find that out, that people actually do buy water. So, all right, with that, however, let's go ahead. So we already have been through that a little bit. Maybe I'll try to type some of these up as we go a little bit, or we can just discuss. What's our customer segment?
Low income, rural, and peri-urban.
Yeah, so urban, peri-urban, right, is what they use, rural. Specifically, and if you remember last week, we talked about trying to really bring down as much as we could characteristics of these people. So what are some of the characteristics? So we already identified they live in these urban or peri-urban or rural communities. They make $2 to $5 a day. What else do we know about them?
Community has to be 5,000 people.
Yeah, they typically live where there's a village of people of some sort, right? 2 to 10,000 people. Any other characteristics? Of course, they have limited access to water, things like that, right? Which is, I think, a lot better description of who these people are than just, we're going to go help people who don't have access to clean water, right? And a lot of times that's where we start. And that's an okay starting point, but hopefully through the last two sessions we've learned a little bit that we can get more specific. And the more specific we are, the better we're going to be. So what's the value proposition? What is it that they're offering?
Clean water.
They offer clean water. What else are they doing? What? So some form of sustainability, yeah, because this is, they say it lasts for at least 10 years.
I was a little bit hesitant. Has that been studied? Do they know really that it lasts 10 to 15 years, or are they just saying that?
I didn't deep dive into that. My guess is that, probably, but I don't know. I could be wrong. One of the problems, again, if you travel and look at some of these developing nations, one thing that this company offers directly is maintenance. That's part of their value proposition. So if you go to a place where we've had Western civilization drop in solar panels, I think we mentioned this a little bit before. A lot of times within 2 years, those solar panels are not working because they need maintenance. And people start using them for all sorts of other things. The same is true here. These water systems don't typically last very long unless people are maintaining them. So they've put this into their structure. So that's part of their value proposition is maintenance for 10 years, 10 to 15 years. That's part of the agreement that they have with the government. Anything else?
Jobs.
Yeah, jobs. That is definitely part of the value proposition, right? So they use local workforce and they are able to employ these people as they build the system, and then also they're employing local people to do the maintenance as well. All right, so what about, let's go to revenue streams. How are they actually making money here?
Well, Matt, aren't they offering something a lot deeper than this, just water?
Sure.
They're offering peace of mind.
Yeah,
They're
so
offering healthy children.
I think that's definitely the case. So they're offering, right, health. They're offering a change in their lifestyle in a very real way. Like you said, it's an investment in their children as well.
They're offering convenience.
Yep. Good. Any other comments along those lines?
Extension of credit. An extension of credit.
An extension of credit is so they're offering credit.
I think they are.
I think they work to get credit. In fact, I'd put that as maybe one of their key activities.
They get credit
Is-
to run it, to build them, and then they pay off the loans using the 10 cents charge.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that they've had to find a way to do is to actually so they get upfront capital from the government to build these, but they don't get the full cost, right? So they get like half the cost, and then they finance the rest. So they have these relationships to get these loans. All right, so we talked about they do revenue by actually selling water, and they have a price which is 10 cents for, what was it, 20 liters, yeah. And then we also,
Anything more by giving, like, let's say I have a bottle of clean water
yeah,
in my community. Am I cooler than other people who don't?
that's a good question. What do you think from this? They actually mentioned this to some extent here. Yeah, they've actually created a brand, right? So they have this Dr. Water. I don't know whether that's a good thing
Am I
or a
telling
bad
other
thing.
people something by having this bottle of water?
What do you guys think?
I think they are. It's like having an Apple computer if you have the Dr. Water, you know.
Yeah. So we could, that might be part of the value proposition as well, is that, there is some separation of who these people are, who these communities are.
But
And
if I drive a Volvo, I'm saying what? I'm a Democrat. Okay, no, you're right.
that's very
What else
true.
is it saying? If I drive a Volvo, what am I saying?
Care about safety.
Exactly. I
Yep.
care a lot about safety. And I care more about safety than you schmo driving the SUV Suburban or whatever. Or whatever. I'm
Yeah.
saying I care about the environment somehow.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, when we talk about value proposition, I think we're talking about values
Yeah.
here. And what do people really value?
So, yep.
It's not just a clean, it's not just clean water.
I agree. So in our sessions before, we haven't dug deep into some of this value proposition as opposed to separating out the products versus what it is you're buying, right? So we have talked a little bit about when you exchange money for something, you're not just buying, the sum of those parts. There's some other value that you believe you're getting in exchange for that money, right? So if you watch iPhone commercials, we've all seen the one iPhone commercial where they say hello in like 20 different languages, right? Have you guys seen that commercial? Right? So Apple's not selling you in that case a 10 megapixel camera. They're not selling you a 1.8 gigahertz dual core processor in your phone, right? Even though that's physically what you're buying, they're actually selling you something else. They're selling you this experience, this ability to communicate, to connect with people, right? And that's kind of one of Apple's messages, is that they sell experiences. They change your life and how you feel. Whereas if you look at, say, a Microsoft commercial, a lot of times what they're selling is productivity, right? If you watch some of their commercials and they talk about how much you can do, and when they compare, if you've seen the Siri commercial where it's Microsoft versus Siri, and it's like, the Siri says, I can't do that, or I can't do this, right? Microsoft is saying, hey, you can be productive, and that's different. Again, they're selling, like their insides are almost the same, but what you're buying is different. So I think Vic has a very valid point here. One that I think here specifically, this Dr. Water concept, again, who would have thought that you could brand water that you sell in these developing nations. And yet this is what this company has done. And we could think a little bit more about why. So is it maybe because this gives them some market edge? Is it because people will then maybe want to buy their water even more? Is it so that they can get into the community beside the one that they just installed? So I think that's all part of it. Any other comments or questions on that concept? So I think definitely as you think about developing your product, and we're going to talk about that some today, but you can think about some of these values and things that you're selling or that you're providing. And maybe, again, maybe none of us had thought to brand our specific device or a specific concept, or we're very concerned about getting it to people for free, when actually we can give them something in exchange for their money that's greater to them than the value of their money. That's the whole purpose that they want to buy it. What else can we say about this company? What do we know about their costs? What are some of the things that they have to pay for here? Yep, so construction costs, maintenance costs. They're going to have continued labor associated with that maintenance. They're also, did anyone notice that they're talking about the next things that they're going to do beyond water, beyond the current phase of water sensors? If you got to the, I think it's the last or second to last paragraph, talks about some of their other costs. That they're actually doing research and development. That they're trying to not just make this one water system the way it is, which I think maybe definitely goes to Vic's point, is that they're planning a way through this market to give these people something more. So they're talking about developing sensors. So R&D costs are one of the things here. And those R&D development might also fall into some of their key activities, right? That they believe that the way they're going to maintain themselves in this market is by continuing to have cutting edge water sources for these people that people want, because it changes who they are and it provides clean water for them. So key partners, we mentioned local governments. Key resources, anyone want to toss out what you think some of their resources are?
Notice for the key resources, one of them would be just available water sources.
Yeah, so they have to be strategic where they place themselves, right? So water sources. So they must have some ability to, I don't know if they're always by rivers or what they're by, but that's right.
Fundraising is probably a big problem for them, so finding sustainable donors. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe in one of these key activities, they're trying to find sources of capital as well. If you read a little bit, I think it's in that top little gray section, these other companies have actually invested in water health because they're getting a return on their money. This isn't just donations to get water, that they're actually, getting investments, that they're actually making loans and paying back loans in order to be a sustainable company. So another comment on key resources I would say is they have some, I don't know if we want to call it intellectual property, but they do have something about these systems, right? So one of their key resources is these systems that they've developed, which allow them to be constructed quickly. They have systems for the construction, for the maintenance, all of that kind of stuff. Customer relationships and channels. Does anyone want to talk about that? What's that?
After delivery.
They offer delivery. Okay, yep. And along with the relationships, we didn't put it down before, but we talked about the brand, right? So branding is a form of a customer relationship.
Matt, I didn't read this, but is this a franchise model?
No, I don't think they're a franchise model.
Could it become one?
Seems like they could. They're not quite a franchise. What they end up doing, at least from what they said here, is they have teamed up with other companies and become joint ventures with other companies to work with these local governments. So there's like I think there's an India division and there's various other divisions like that. Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is, could people from a local village say, hey, I'd like one of these things, and then they could end up also turning that into a job for themselves, maybe
Oh.
a part-time job, and then create this kind of franchise model that should spread virally.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I don't know that they're doing that, but certainly that might be one channel, right? Is that a franchise business model? All right, does anyone else want to make any comments or questions on this particular company? Was this helpful at all to be able to see all these different pieces, how they're trying to make it work, and maybe puts it a little bit in perspective of what you're trying to do as well, that it's not to say, you know, it's overly complex, but to see, hey, here's how someone can do it, and here's how all those pieces might fit together. So I think next section we'll try to come up with another one that maybe can be helpful for us as well. And obviously you're welcome to keep that. We've posted this on the Google Drive also for those who want access to it. All right, so now is a time where we're going to do a little bit more of what we did at the beginning with Ann, and we're going to try to figure out some of the things that you guys have done for the past couple weeks. So what I'd like you to do, instead of just reporting to the whole room, what I'd like you to do is actually get up and kind of mix and mingle a little bit. Get outside of your group that you're sitting with and your team, and let's go to someone on a different team and then try to do some of the things we've talked about. Take 1 or 2 sentences and explain the problem that you're trying to solve. Who is the customer that you're trying to serve? And then what have you done to try to verify that? What have you done to identify this customer? What have you done to further understand your problem or the problem that you're trying to solve? Who have you spoken with? And what themes maybe have you started to identify as you've gone out and talked to people? So let's do that for the next couple minutes and go from there. Hopefully that was helpful. I think as I interacted with, I think 3 groups here, it seemed like you guys are all out doing stuff, and that's fantastic. Way to go. And hopefully you also, as you shared, maybe you got some good ideas from those around you and can keep on going in the right direction. So good work. Last time we talked a little bit about this, developing a value proposition. So we're not going to really go over that this much here, but hopefully this concept of trying to find, right, this problem, understand the people you're trying to serve, and being able to provide that gain for the pains that they have is a concept that you're starting to get a better grasp on now. So I'd like to show you a video here. So this is an example of a product that, well, it's hard to say it's a product, but an example of something that some people made to try to make the world a better place. And it's a trash bin. You might have seen it before.
Oh, no.
What do you think about that video? What do you learn about their product, what they were trying to do? How good was it? How good was their product? Huh?
I'm just gonna say Volkswagen likes their brand.
Yeah, no, that wasn't meant to be a Volkswagen commercial. I'm sorry. It's just an example. But yeah, Volkswagen does like their brand. They had this contest where it's called, I'll just give you the backstory, which is the Fun Theory contest, and they had all these people. And that definitely contributed to their brand, right? Because Volkswagen is supposed to be this fun brand. So that's part of the reason they did it. But that aside, what do we learn about what these people were trying to do with this product?
Engage.
So they engaged the people in the park, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, they're hooking people on something that doesn't actually have anything to do with trash. So, I don't know, it's just, I think people think that you have to market based on what your product is, and I don't know. I guess that sort of had to do with it, but like the fun factor wasn't inherently associated with trash cans.
Yeah. So an engineer, so I spent a lot of time on North Campus. An engineer, if they were making this product, would tell you that this is a 62.5 gallon trash can with, it would tell you all the features and everything it has, right? But they tried to design something that was kind of intuitive in how you used it and engaged people in a real way. So they tried to take into consideration the people that would actually be using it. So kids, for example, would definitely be interested in something that makes sound in a park, right? And that's who's in parks. Whereas this probably wouldn't necessarily be an appropriate trash can for the hospital across the street. Maybe though, maybe I could be wrong. The doctors and nurses might stand there tossing in their rubber gloves over and over. Yeah, in the children's hospital might be okay. Yep. All right. So let me ask you another question though. How come we don't see these around parks? Right? They showed us this worked almost twice as well as your typical trash can in the park, right? It was 72 kilograms versus 41 kilograms in the neighboring one.
They weren't trying to make money off the recycling. They didn't take the cans and recycle them and get the 10-cent deposit back. There's no economic model of it.
Okay. There's no economic model for who?
For the person who's making the trash cans.
For the person who's making the trash can, okay.
The trash can costs what? Twice as much as a normal trash can? 4 times as much?
Yeah.
That had to be plugged in.
Yeah, so it might have some other costs associated with it. Who's their customer, by the way? Or who would maybe be their customer? Since clearly we don't see them. Probably Public Works, right? Is Public Works willing to spend twice as much for a trash can?
If it means spending half as much on waste diversion and cleanup.
You'd have to
So-
prove it to them that it's gonna. You'd have to have some study saying, hey, look, we saved this much money by putting these trash cans in.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to whether or not Public Works wants to spend twice as much on a trash can, but that's the point of going out and asking them and trying to find out whether or not they would or not. Go ahead.
But I feel like eventually that would stop working, because I mean, you put in one trash can and all trash cans are like that, you get tired of that noise, and you're like, I don't care, it's just a regular trash can.
Yeah, so maybe it's not such a good product. I don't know.
Only work for a little time, not sustainable, not.
Yeah. So this is an example of someone testing a product. Now, whether or not they can make this a sustainable business or whether or not they even tried, I don't know, honestly. As I watch this, I think it's a cool idea, a cool concept, right? But as I mentioned, we don't see it everywhere. And so maybe there is some disconnect between the customer, what their needs are, Public Works or whoever their customer would be, and being able to make this make money so you could actually sell it and make it sustainable. There also might be some infrastructure costs, right? Now, all of a sudden, out in the middle of a park, we have to run electricity, electrical wires, and all that kind of stuff. So there might be other barriers that as we talk to parks people, we find out that maybe this is or isn't a good idea. But there's also a possibility as we do this that we learn something and we're able to adjust, and maybe we can make this into a sustainable business because of our testing and our ability to understand what it is Public Works needs in order to be able to spend twice as much on a garbage can, right? Is there some way we can actually add that value back to them? You might have seen this before. This is actually from the Institute of Design at Stanford. Have any of you heard of the Institute of Design? A few of you. So if you search Institute of Design, Stanford, you'll find this website, which actually is fabulous and has all sorts of design concepts that you can go to. There's online short courses, not these 20 sessions, but actually there's like hour and a half kind of courses you can go to. There's lots of material there to help you think more about product design, user interfaces, how you work with people, how you make things work for them. So these are 5 of the steps that they really push forward a lot, which I think are fantastic and kind of subscribe to myself as I think about developing products. But empathize and define. So empathize means trying to get to know the people that you are developing things for. And then defining means defining the problem you're trying to solve. So we've spent a lot of time the past 2 sessions trying to really work on those 2 concepts. Ideate basically means coming up with concepts, brainstorming, coming up with ideas. And you've been doing that in these sessions, in your groups, and trying to come up with different ideas to do that. Today, we'd like to focus a little bit on this ideate, prototype, test concept. So we're going to talk about ways that maybe you can do things like test. If you had that idea for a trash bin, could you test it and make it usable and see whether or not it could actually catch on or not? And so with that, I thought we'd also, I'll just share with you another kind of concept or a kind of a story that talks about some of these, brings together all 5 of these steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. So one thing that you can do is you go out and talk to people. You can try to find out what we might call bright spots. This is also a design concept that people use in developing products, which basically means, are there people from your segment, are there people that you're trying to serve who actually don't have that problem that you're trying to solve? In other words, are there low-income mothers who do breastfeed, right? And if so, what is it that they're doing different that allows them to overcome that problem? Are there schools that have lower infectious disease rates? And if so, what is it that they're doing? Sometimes we're able to identify solutions to problems natively within the population that we're trying to serve, because often it turns out not everyone has that problem that we want to be able to solve. So we might be able to find patterns and ways that people are already solving it, and maybe be able to use that to integrate into our design or our concept into a way that is very natural for them to incorporate. Have any of you read the book Switch? Yeah. All right, so you already know this story. It's kind of a cool story. So Jerry Sternin, he was part of this organization called Save the Children, and he went to Vietnam, and he was tasked with trying to find ways to help children who were malnourished. And so he used this bright spots concept. And he was basically told at the time by the foreign minister, who didn't like this guy at all. He said, you have 6 months and then you're out of here. If you can't make a difference in 6 months, you're just like all the rest of those Westerners who come in here and try to solve our problems for us. So you have 6 months and then you're out. So he went in and did try to find these bright spots. He went in systematically and started weighing children in all these villages across Vietnam. And he ended up finding out that there were kids who were bigger and healthier than all the rest of the kids. And so he tried to find out why. And he started observing the patterns of these families with kids that were healthier. And they started to notice that they would actually eat, because they were all about the same poverty level, income level, that they actually ate the same amount of food, but the way they ate their food was entirely different. So the kids who were malnourished typically ate 2 meals a day that were kind of, not big, but bigger. And the kids who were healthier were eating 4 meals a day that were all smaller. And so they hypothesized that part of the reason was that if they were just eating 2 meals a day that were bigger, that these kids actually were just unable to completely digest this food and use all the nutrients in the food. They also noticed that in the kids that were healthier, that their parents were very active in making sure that they ate. So instead of using a community bowl, which was very common in these parts, he started to notice that the parents would actually feed the kids, sometimes by hand, and kind of make sure that these kids were actually eating. They also did a few other things. They noticed that the parents would mix in things like shrimp and greens and some of these things like these greens and various other plants that they were feeding their children who were healthier. These plants were also typically considered only for like the poor. In other words, like they weren't considered healthy, but yet he noticed that they were eating them and they were healthier kids. So, oops, there's a typo there. Formed groups where moths shared stories. That should actually be mothers. The moths were not sharing stories. So what he ended up doing was he tried to find a way to propagate this through the other villages. And so he decided to try having these groups of mothers come in and share their stories and share their recipes in a very kind of open, friendly atmosphere. Instead of, he could have come in, of course, and started going from village to village and teach these parents, right? Like if you want your kids to be healthy, start feeding them 4 meals a day instead of 2. If you want your kids to be healthy, stop using a community bowl and start sitting beside your kid and feeding them, right? But that's not what he did at all. Because he recognized the power of these communities and friendships and the power, most importantly, I think, of culture, and was able to bring these mothers together. They had groups where they would come in anywhere from 3 or 4 to 10 mothers, and they would actually just cook together and eat together. And he got them practicing how they would actually use these principles, and then it started just propagating on its own. And pretty soon, within the 6 months, it turns out, they were able to show that 65% of the kids did have better health. And then they ended up having an independent group come in, unbeknownst to the Save the Children group. I think it was like 10 years later, and we're testing this same group of children and found out that it was sustained, that their health was sustained, and they were just overall better health. So I share that story because to me it was a good example as I was thinking about the challenges that you guys are working on, of a way to approach some of the problems that you want to solve. Can you identify themes? Can you identify what Chip Heath and Dan Heath call bright spots amongst the people that have this issue? So, and most likely there are ways. Now, I'm not saying that's the only answer to the problems that you're trying to solve, but that's one approach that you can take in order to find a solution. This brings us to this next point of how do you actually prototype and test, and can you prototype and test your ideas, right? A lot of times when we think of prototyping, we think of, actually like making it or spending hours and hours coding it up if we're making an app, or hiring out some machinist to make this device or whatever. But I would suggest to you that your prototypes can actually be very simple and probably should be very simple, especially in the early stages, that you can make them out of things like paper, that you can use PowerPoint or other diagramming tools, whether that's software or drawings, if you want to make an app to show different interfaces that people might use. That you can use things as simple as clay, wood, or plastic, common objects, but some of the keys are not to spend too much time on your prototyping. So that garbage can, you didn't hear it at the beginning, but you saw that little clip, right, where they just took a sound, I think you can buy this thing at Radio Shack, and just hooked it up to the garbage can to see. That's all. So it took them, all of a half hour to prototype this thing and start testing it. And that's what they did. So you want to be able to identify what you want to learn or test, and definitely try to keep the user in mind. So there's a software company here in town called Menlo Innovations. Have any of you heard of Menlo Innovations? They're very kind of well known in this area, and they have all sorts of cool stuff going on there. So they do software development for all sorts of companies. Sometimes these are for software on like computers, and sometimes for, say, iPads or iPhones. And one of the ways that they actually do software development and test is they will literally take pieces of paper and say they want to make an iPhone app for someone. They will draw out they'll ask their software engineers to draw out what they think that screen should look like on an iPhone. Just rough sketch, not detailed sketch, but where would you put the right arrow, left arrow, what box would you put, where would you put text input? And then they'll do that for all the different screens that they would expect to have in this app. And then they'll stand there with the user and they'll put the piece of paper on the iPhone and they'll hand it to them and say, what would you do if you saw this on your screen? And then they watch the person, hit a certain spot on the screen. And they watch, and then they pull the paper away and grab the next one that should happen when they do that. And they watch the way they interact with them. They didn't have to code up anything. It took them a half hour to draw up these pictures. And they're able to learn things like, oh, you know what? That person found it really unnatural. They kept hitting the wrong spot when they wanted to type in the name. Or when they wanted to search, they kept looking. They couldn't find this search button. And so they'll make adjustments and they'll do the same thing until they get it right. And it's only when they get it right that they actually end up making the thing, in their case, software. Here's an example of exactly that, right? For, say, a patient interface that you might be giving to a doctor who's going to store electronic medical records, right? So I might say that this is my iPad, right? It has their name and it has their age, symptoms, history, buttons on it. And so you could hand this to the physician and say, does this have what you need? Or how would you interact with this? And this might be the first screen, and there might be screens 2 and 3, and I might see that he keeps trying to hit symptoms to type in symptoms, but really he can't type in symptoms there because that's on a different screen. And so I make an adjustment. I turn that symptoms into, instead of just a display screen, I turn it into an input screen. Does that kind of make sense? Again, very simple ways that you can do some prototyping and testing. So what I'd like you to do is to go ahead and try to prototype your idea in some form or fashion. So what I did today, I brought my kids' Christmas presents. I opened up their Play-Doh and their Legos for them. I was just trying to save time on Christmas morning. So I have Play-Doh and Legos here for those who want them. I also brought all sorts of random objects that you can use to test and prototype. So there's these bags, there's paper, pencils, cards, plates, magnets, glue, markers. You don't have to use these things in the way they're intended. You can use them in any way you want. There's paper, all right? Rubber bands, all sorts of stuff. So what I want you to do is go ahead and come up here and as quickly as you can, in 5 to 10 minutes, make some version of your product, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make something. In closing, here's what I want to encourage you to do. And some of you, it turns out, have already started to do this, but continue working on some prototype, something that you can go and share with people, all right? Again, this doesn't have to be incredibly elegant or anything like that. You're just trying to figure out, what do these people need, what do they want, what works for them, okay? So go ahead and make your product, make a prototype of your product, do it in a very simple form, test it with real people, and then iterate it at least once. Update it, change it based on what you learned, and then do the same thing again. Thank you.
Email people with t-shirts